Actually building the toolkits was sort of a challenge because we had to address what our own personal skills were in making the project. I was more interested in the learning design part of it, but it was really hard to find a happy medium between the learning design and the tried and tested theories, but also with tips and content that would really be relevant to students and not just always necessarily what's brought up in research, but what are students using in their everyday lives that can help them improve. So it was difficult sometimes to make those two things meet in a way that would make sense.
So yeah, as we started tying everything up in the end, it was both really exciting because we were able to see how far we'd come and really how much we were able to get on there, but then we really saw, oh wow, there's still, even towards the end, there's still a lot to do. And really just continually going back over them and finding, you know, what good resource can we put here, what can we make it a little bit better. And then eventually finding, we had a couple big breakthroughs with the layout in terms of condensing the SlideShare stuff and the questions together into gravity forms, and then that had its own little revolution with the way we were doing the layout. Yeah.
So combining all the content and actually creating that full page as opposed to just the working toolkit with the slides and the questions was challenging and somewhat overwhelming because of the fact that there's so much content and there's so many great resources out there, but we didn't want to overwhelm the students with what we were putting on there. And so I think one thing that I really learned from that is how important it is to collaborate with all the different partners that we were working with, because there were so many things that got added to that toolkit that I never would have thought of, or that I didn't even know existed. And so it was that collaboration and really getting everyone on board to have input really created something that was the best for students. And I think the biggest challenge was really just selecting the best resources because there were so many, and to make this the most meaningful toolkit for students, we had to be very diligent about what actually went in there. And, you know, yes, maybe it was a good resource, but maybe it wouldn't be applicable to students at UBC or something like that. So it was really just going through everything sort of with a fine-tooth comb and really deciding what went in there.
So when we actually decided to sit down and actually turn our abstract, wonderful ideas into a concrete product, that was the trickiest part, because it's something that you have in your head when you're actually trying to make it work in the WordPress and actually exploring different technologies that I hadn't used before. That was just a big challenge, and a lot of it was trying to decide what content actually made sense as you start implementing it, and what content just is no longer relevant or actually feasible to do. So that deciding line, there were a few frustrating days fighting with some features, and then there were other days where it would just work and we would move in a completely different direction because what we were stuck on wasn't working. So we'd stop and think about it and think of another way to do it that would just kind of fall into place, and then the rest of the day would go so much smoother.
Coming up with the questions was difficult because it's something that we encounter a lot in our lives as students, but we don't always pay attention to how these things were created. So having to look at it from a different perspective, basically a teacher perspective, was really difficult, and that's why it was rewarding, is because at the end of it I felt like I had a much better understanding of how curriculum is designed, why certain questions are asked. And in my own learning now, when I'm looking at an assignment, I'm not just looking at the question in terms of how to answer it, but why that question is even being asked of me in the first place.